All right, everybody, welcome back to another episode of the Lasting Learning Podcast. I am so glad you are here. This episode is going to be a good one. It's going to be a good one, because you're here, you're listening, you're growing, but because today we have an extra special guest. We have a guest who is not only brilliant, but she is connected. She's got great relational skills. She's an attorney. She's a cat lady. She's got it all going for her. She's an author. She's got multiple books in the pipeline. She's got books out there right now. She will blow your socks off talking about AR and AI and pretty much any other acronym that you can come up with. She's pretty much a rock star in the edu landscape right now. And I'm so glad that I get to welcome Rachelle Dene Poth to the podcast. Rachelle, welcome to Lasting Learning.
I'm almost speechless after that welcome and introduction. Like, I don't know. I do think that, thank you for having me, first of all, and for so many wonderful words and complimentary things that you said. But I think my favorite new word and I've not ever heard this before, edu landscape.
Boom. I just made that up and we're going to roll with it.
I like it. I like it a lot. Yeah. No, so thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here and chat with you. And when I hear you say all those things, it's like, did I really do all of that? You know, I mean, we're all so busy. It's like, where do you find the time to do different things? But I was just talking to somebody a couple of days ago about, looking at the future and thinking back to like, where was I 5-10 years ago? Or, you're on Facebook and it pops up. Yeah. And I think back like 5 years to my last class reunion, how entirely different my life was. Like, there is nothing that I could refer to back then that would make me even think that I would be doing like one of these things now. So it's, and it just makes you realize like, anything is possible. You just got to like learn some time management, put yourself out there. But anyway, thank you again for having me here to talk with you.
No, absolutely. And so let's paint the edu landscape with who you are a little bit. Before I hit record, you and I had a little conversation, and we were talking about how sometimes it can be awkward to be on camera or to be recording or even being on Twitter or Facebook, because you don't want to feel like you're doing a bunch of self-promotion. And I think that's what's cool about these kinds of conversations that we're going to have, because it's, you've got all these projects, you've got all these books, but we're not here just to sell those. You are absolutely incredible. And you've got all this knowledge and wisdom and about education and school and all that, but you got a lot of life experience in you too. You've done a lot. And I'm going to focus on something that really caught my eye.
Okay.
Attorney. Yeah. And that catches my eye because I went to law school, but did absolutely nothing with it, because I realized, I went there just to see if I could get in. I got in, and I realized I wasn't as smart as I thought I was to actually go and do anything with it. But you are an attorney. Mm-hmm. Why?
Yeah, that is a question I have been asked a lot over the whole span. I graduated law school in 2006, so it's been a while. And I always joke like, yep, I only have like 13 more years on those loans. But people will say, do you regret it? Or do you wish you would have done something differently? And not at all. But it was something that the way that I got into it, when I graduated from Penn State, I had my degree in teaching French, and I didn't know that I really wanted to go into education. I had some family members who were in education. I loved playing school as a kid, just like to learn. But I kind of got to the point where they're like, you need to make a decision. So I was doing well with French, graduated, tried to get a job teaching, couldn't find one. And people suggested, you should go back and get a certification in history. And I really didn't see that as an interest for me. But the natural progression was to get another language. So I went into the Spanish. And as I was taking the courses at University of Pittsburgh, they had courses in translation. And I thought, well, that'd be kind of cool to be like a translator. So I took things like medical translation, business translation, the amount of vocabulary that I learned for all of these different things, like places and engineering and the components. I was just like, wow, there's so much to know. But the one thing that really stuck with me were all of the courses I took for legal translation. And I did that both for French and Spanish. So anyway, I started to get this interest in the law, thought about, I wonder if I could, can we pause?
All right, we just took a quick pause there. I don't know if you guys saw the cat lady. She's like a cat whisperer. Cat walk, yeah, and she's got the cat trained to open doors, like all kinds. Can you get the cat to go get you a beer real quick too, and then come back, or not yet? Okay, okay,
No.
carry on though. Translation, legal translation. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah. So I took the translation courses for French and for Spanish because I just found them to be so interesting. And I didn't realize at the time the connection with the languages and the law and so forth. But I thought about maybe becoming a paralegal just like on the side. There were not programs available during the day, or in the summer. So I said, okay, forget that. I just decided at one point, I think in my late 20s, to maybe I'll just see how I do on the exam to get into law school, see what happens. Got the test scores, had no idea what that meant. Oh, well, probably won't get in anyway, let it go. So then a few years after that, I thought, I wonder if, I don't want to be someday in the future like, yeah, I wonder if I could have applied, gotten in. And I didn't tell anybody. I had to take the test again because, 2 years or so had passed. Applied only to Duquesne because Duquesne University has an evening program.
Yeah.
And I thought if I get in, great, I'll decide. And if I don't, then I know. And I got the letter that I was accepted. And I'm like, all right, so I got to make some decisions. And it's kind of funny because, telling my family, they're like, but you have a job. Like, I know, but I kind of want to do this. And then when I made the call, you think it's like undergraduate when you're like, oh, I can take a course at like 9 a.m. or whatever I want. Oh, no, you come Monday through Thursday night and you have 4 different courses and it's like 6 till 9:30 and it's 4 years. And I'm like, all right, so I'm going to be living in a school, different schools. But I really wanted to do it. And it was hard. I mean, very challenging to do the teaching full time. And then to go, 4 nights a week into Pittsburgh, which is about a half an hour from my house. And there were days I would come home after school and then drive back down there. And it's 100 miles in the car, studying all weekend. But I was not going to, take any chances with it. And you would often find me in the library with like books stacked up, like writing notes, typing notes, listening, still to cassettes at the time because they were still out there. But, just going for it with everything I had and to see what would happen. But did graduate in 2006 and passed the bar first time. And I did some legal work on the side and I keep up the attorney, the practice and my license and everything. But I really don't think that, and I say this with about probably 95% accuracy, and I've said it several times, is I really don't think that I would still be teaching had it not been for going to law school. Just the amount of growth personally, professionally, and what it helped me to change as far as being a teacher. It definitely was a good decision. But, whether or not I actually ever fully practice as an attorney, who knows, could happen. But it comes in handy in so many ways that I didn't even realize at first, but just I catch myself a lot of time. Or people will call and say, hey, I got a legal question for you. If it's not, hey, I got a cat question for you. It's one or the other.
That's awesome. Yeah, I can relate to a lot of what you just said. The law school experience, sitting in as a student, really, it transformed me as a teacher, just on how I taught. And I actually just had a conversation today in my day job. So I'm a curriculum director and I get to work with a bunch of principals. And we were going back and we were looking at the MSTEP, which is the big exam here in Michigan for all of our students. And there are questions in there. In the 10, 15 years ago, questions would have been, students read this passage and tell us the main idea, just comprehension questions, go back and cite the evidence. And now it's all about citing the best evidence and determining your own point of view versus the author's point of view. And in law school, that's how it's taught. It's all very Socratic. They say, here's a bunch of facts. You need to figure out which one is the best fact, what evidence really relates to this case. And it's revolutionary. It's the Socratic method of teaching really forces people to think in a different way. Did you have that same experience? Was it mind-boggling for you at first?
It was, because I know even just in high school and in college, I struggled with trying to figure out exactly how to study and to prepare, because foreign languages, those came easier to me. For some reason, I just connected with it. But other classes, I could read something so many times and do whatever it was. And then as soon as I try to apply, it's like gone. And kind of like just that, that low level, like, ask me the question, here's the answer right back to you. But applying it in that different way and, really being pushed in some of the classes. Like I had one class my first year and, you have to recite cases. And I over-prepared. People would joke me like, oh, there she is reading all of her law books again. I'm like, yeah, because I'm not going to take any chances. So it was my turn to do a case in contract law, and called on me to prepare and present the case. And I knew all of the facts and everything. And he just kept asking these questions. I kid you not, for an hour and a half, the last half of class that night, it was like my show. He kept trying to give me answer questions. I had no idea what the answer was that he wanted. People were trying to whisper and help. Like, they were sweating, I was sweating. And I'm looking at the clock, and I remember thinking, okay, it's like 5 minutes until class ends. It's just going to end. We're going to be done. No, because he says next week we'll pick up with Poth, and maybe she'll have the answers to the questions next time. So then the next week, another hour and a half. Oh. So I developed tremendous wait time in my own classroom. And it also helped me to realize to connect with students too. Like, we ask the questions, and if they don't know, and sometimes I would just let them go with that and say, okay, and go call on somebody else. But working with them, but also not just answering the simple lower level questions, like getting them to think and get to that productive struggle point where it is uncomfortable. I mean, there are times that I don't know the answer to a lot of things, and I'm like, I just want to give up. But what kind of an example does that set? But it really did, like you said, like, it gave me a different perspective of my role in the classroom, what it's like to be a student. Kind of all of that is what kind of pulled me back into the profession in a way. Not that I was really ever disengaged, but I said earlier on, like, I didn't know if this was something that I could see myself doing for 30 years or whatever, just because when I got into it, it wasn't something that I was like, yeah, I've wanted to do this since I was whatever age. I mean, I liked school, I liked learning, but I didn't see that I could be beneficial, or that I would be very effective in that role at that point. So
But one of the things that I really appreciate about you is I feel like you're someone that you knock down walls. You don't see obstacles. You see obstacles and they're in front of you, but then you say, okay, I'm coming through it. So it's going to have to move. If you have a desire, you go get it. I'm thinking, I'll go back to, you talked about your undergrad and you were getting a degree in French. And I don't know if this is true or not, but there might be some people out there that might have some kids going into college in the next couple of years. And if those kids told their parents they were going to go get a degree in French, it's sort of like saying, I'm going to go get a degree in liberal arts. And the parents would say, what are you going to do with that? But you got a dream. You were going to do something with it, right? And then, you go get a job and you say, okay, I'm going to go to law school. And what are you going to do with that? I'm just going to go to law school. You want to do something, you're just going to go get it.
Yeah.
That's pretty.
And that comes from, my upbringing too, with my parents, just, always so supportive, and, you never know until you try. Yeah. And I have come up against a lot of roadblocks or things, and I'm just like, but you try and think, of little hacks around them sometimes, right. And they may not always work, but, yeah, I don't know. I do like a challenge, and I've been better about challenging myself more because I want my students to do the same thing. And so I can't be, and for so long I was just like, oh, you don't want to speak in front of the classroom because your friends, like, I don't get that. Like, why wouldn't you know them? But I myself did not want to speak in front of my own peers at professional development. And I'm like, wait a minute. I don't want to do the same thing that they don't want to do, but yet I'm forcing them to do this. And I thought, well, I better dive right in. And, and sometimes it is uncomfortable, but I like those challenges because it keeps me moving, and not like I was always like this. I mean, I've just said this so many times too. Even this past weekend, I was at Rewire and telling, like, well, I was a terrible teacher for 15 years or so. And, oh, no, probably not. I go, no, looking back now, things I know, things I intentionally did not do because either they were, uncomfortable for me to make the changes, or I was just thinking, like, no, like, a student can't come in and teach a class, or like, what do you mean you can sit on the floor working groups? Like, we never did that. So why should I let you do that? And having that knowledge now, I mean, it's easy to say, oh yeah, I would change all those things, but we can't. So now I do try to, like, thrive a little bit more on, taking some risks. And if there is somebody says, oh, it's not going to work, and I'm like, well, let me think about that for a minute. Like, might not be the exact same thing, but yeah, I don't know.
It's crazy hearing, how you start off to where you are now. So for people that don't necessarily know, like, your passions right now, a lot of it deals with technology. not necessarily the foreign language. Well, it is a foreign language, I guess, when we're talking coding.
Yeah, right.
But it's not law. It's not the study of history. It's not foreign language. It's technology. How did that evolution
Mhm.
come into your life? How did that become a new passion?
Yeah, that's one of the other surprising things when people, especially like, at school, we have open houses for our open house for our parents. And I'm the Spanish and STEAM teacher. And it's easy to make that connection because you go, oh, okay, the A in the arts. But when I talk about some of these topics at conferences or if I write about them, it's like, how did you get into that? And I always loved tech. Back when computers started coming in the classrooms, we had AOL and like creating your first email account. You're like, waiting for the connection. Like, is this going to happen?
There might be
It's
some
just,
teachers out here listening that haven't been teaching for the last year. AOL, America Online. We used to have to do the dial-up and saw the little running man on
the
the
running
screen.
man, yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so
Yeah.
old days.
Old days. Right. And, that was always part of what I'd like to do. And in my classroom, I don't know, probably 10 years ago now, I was just teaching and talking at them, same worksheets, packets, you name it, all things were the same. And I wanted to do some different games in our class, but we didn't have enough devices back then. So I would take my students to the computer lab and just give them a typed up list of websites, which of course that was tricky because is it a capital L? I mean, is it an L? Is it a capital I? Is it a what? The letters. So they'd be typing them all in. And of course, now there's better ways. You can put all of those onto a Padlet or curate them somehow and just share them out. But that was my, I guess, start into using tech in my classroom. Also teaching students why translators like Google Translator, the other ones, like, are not good for learning language at that level. Total different story if you're learning it to travel or for, whatever, but trying to pull it in different ways like that. And so I gradually built things up. But the funny thing is all of my education, I went from a bachelor's, I never got a master's. And then I got my Juris Doctor when I went to law school, but there wasn't anything that was kind of like catching my interest for a master's degree. And finally I thought, I really like this tech. I wonder if there's a program again in the evening, because obviously not going to, quit teaching school. But in Duquesne also had a master's in a tech program. So I took that. So that was kind of the beginning. But then when we got a STEAM grant in my school and had a makerspace, being the A in arts, I was asked to teach hummingbirds. And and I laugh at this because when I tell this story and I think about when my principal called me in and said, so we're going to have STEAM and you have the A in arts and teaching French and Spanish. We want some culture. You're going to teach hummingbirds. In my mind, I was imagining the ones that fly around my deck in the summer. I'm like, that is really interesting. Like, I don't have any experience with hummingbirds. What am I supposed to do with that? But I didn't tell him that. I was like, sounds good. Sounds good. I have this summer to figure this out. And then I went and I looked it up. I'm like, oh, makes total sense that it's like a robot in programming. But so that was kind of my start to where I am now. But then once I got kind of good at that for 2 years, then they shifted it to the 7th grade. And he said, you need to do something different. And at that point, I was already looking at like augmented virtual reality, thanks to Jamie Donnelly. And I was, into gaming, coding, all of that. Digital citizenship was like a big thing that I really wanted to cover with students. So I said, I want to just do a course on like all of this. And so now I teach this 8th grade What's Next, and it's primarily emerging technology, but a large part of it is also doing some basic things. Like, it's not always about the tech. I mean, with our society, like, there's so much technology and we need our students to understand how you can use it, the benefits and the things they need to be concerned about. But I love teaching them simple things like sketchnoting, for example, and then taking that and like adding layers to it, like putting that into something for AR, VR, or, whatever. So it definitely ties into a personal interest, but realizing that at the end of 4 or 5 years of a study of a language, later on in life, how many times I hear adults say, oh, I had 4 or 5 years of French and I don't remember anything, and here's a few phrases. So I do want them to learn the language, but I also want them to walk away with something that's going to lead them into whatever the next steps are after they leave my classroom or school and then move forward. So hopefully it's a lot of language, retention there that they've gotten, but also skills that they can apply and be adaptable to whatever happens in the world as they, 5, 10 years, 15 years down the road.
So good. So good. Yeah. And again, you practice what you preach. What I just heard you say was you were teaching. You were you look back on it now and a self-proclaimed, not as amazing teacher as you wish you could have been back in the day, but you've evolved And part of that evolution came from getting a nudge from your principal who said, you're going to do this. And you said, okay. A lot of people would have pushed back and said, that's not what I do. That's not my place. You said, okay, bring on the challenge. You evolved it. But now you're out sharing your message with the world. I mean, you're consultants, you are an author, which is interesting. Do you ever hear people that are shocked that you still have time to teach, that you're still in the classroom?
Yes, all the time. And it's funny too, because like, you know, and I say a lot of times when I present, I've presented at different conferences locally, you know, at the state level and nationally, but I really never liked public speaking. And the one thing that was another wake-up call for me was there were these 2 7th grade students that came into a PD session, probably 5 years ago, roughly, and talked about books, showed their project on the smartboard. And I remember sitting in there, and it feels like it was yesterday, looking around at all the teachers in the room and looking at them, and they were just like, cool as could be, no nerves, nothing. And I'm thinking, I'm nervous just even sitting here because I would never want to speak in front of the teachers. And I thought, wow, like they're doing this. And so that kind of is when I realized like I need to start speaking, got into the tech a little bit, but then started to find opportunities for my students to do like a student showcase. We traveled to like a local conference, and also our state affiliate of ISTE has an event for students in Harrisburg every year in May. And then we also have our state conference that happens in Hershey, PA. So I just started to take students to that. And I think, the combination of me getting the master's, getting into the technology, but having those students involved and building relationships with them over in some cases, I had one student in 7th grade who every year, she took 5 years of Spanish, got to know her. She presented. So I eventually got out of the here I am, here's my session, to, okay, here's the session, they're introducing it, I'm just going off to the side and letting them lead. And then that kind of gave me the idea, driving home probably, 3 years ago. I thought about, I need to maybe write a book, but have them write in it. And of course, time kind of, escaped a little bit, but I did get back to it. And actually, a couple of those students did write in both of the books so far. And a lot of the story and the inspiration behind it is from that. It is from those connections. And that's the part where I'm like, I wish I knew this years ago. So because I do write and blog and I go to conferences, people they're surprised and they say, oh, like you teach, what do you teach? I'm like, yeah, I teach Spanish 1 through 4 in a STEAM course. So it's, I teach full time. It's just that I'm very fortunate that, some of the conferences are on the weekend or in the summer, and that my school is very supportive that, I do not like to miss school, but if I can go somewhere for like a 3-day period of time or 2-day period of time where there's all of these different possibilities and educators from around the world, that I can go and just get pieces of that and bring it back for my students and then to share that, that is so valuable to me. But I make time, but I have a lot of hacks. There are tons and tons of hacks that enable me to get my work done, believe it or not.
You're going to have to share some of those with me, because some people might not know this, but trying to schedule this time for you and I to talk has been hard, because you are a popular woman. You are getting pulled in 1,000 different directions. You are super popular. You are the it girl right now.
No. I am so not.
But I think so. You're painting edu landscape, Rachelle. You really are. You're on the cutting edge. You're talking about a topic that a lot of people are interested in, and I truly don't have a clue when it comes to a lot of the stuff that you're talking about. So when you start talking, I'm like a sponge. I just want to eat it up. But you've got that street cred too, because you live it, you walk it, you're in it. So I'm curious about finding that balance, because it's hard. A lot of people might look at you and say, "Oh, you got it made. You got you got everything. You get to travel, you get to speak, you're all over the place on social media, and you've got a stable day job. You're just living the dream. It's so easy, right?"
Oh yeah. So easy. No.
Tell us, how do you find this balance?
It's funny because I wrote a blog, probably, I think it was last month, and it was 10 ideas for self-care, because that's important, right? If we're not taking care of ourselves, we're going to go into school, we're going to come home to our families and just be like a mess. And I recorded a podcast, but it's funny because when I wrote and I also talk, I'm like, yeah, I really need to work on this one, especially like the disconnect. But my problem with like disconnecting is that I feel like if I disconnect, I mean, I can't be without my device for very long at all. I'm getting better at it, like going for walks. But even if I go for a walk, I'm reading a blog or I'm listening to a podcast, doing those kind of learning things on the go, literally. But I feel like if I disconnect for too long, I'm going to miss an opportunity to help somebody at some point, and that really bothers me. And I figure, I can catch up on sleep, because everybody says, "Do you ever sleep?" Like the number one question, followed up by, "How many cats do you have?" But it's usually, it's a toss up between the two. But I definitely have a system that I've gotten better at. Just as a couple examples, like I get up in the morning and I always look at Getting Smart, and I see, what are the latest stories. I try to share those out across, different platforms. On my lunch, I am, working, but I'm either listening to a podcast while I'm doing things in my room, or I'm sitting down, I'm reading, taking some notes on a book, or catching a webinar. On the way home, catching up on Voxer, if there's conversations, listening to those. So I'm moving, it's not like all of that time I'm just sitting focused on one thing. And I don't watch TV, and I've never seen Netflix. So that might give me extra hours in a day. That one surprises people too. I'm like, I don't know what you're talking about. Netflix, forget it. But just those little things. But a lot of times when I do write, I'm not sitting down and physically handwriting a lot of things out. And I've told people that, and they've just been like, wow. Like a few years ago, I was at Summer Spark, and I was holding my phone, just kind of like walking in the room like this, talking. And Jason Bretzman walked by, and then he came back and he looked in, and he thought I was talking on the phone to somebody. And I said, yeah. And he said, what are you doing? I said, I'm writing a blog. And he said, well, how are you writing a blog? I said, I'm just talking into a document. And he said, really? Is that how you do it? And I said, yeah. And I was with Education Right Now this summer with the group in Boston, and Danny Steele and I were talking, and he said, I just got to ask you a question. Like, how do you find balance? How do you find time? And I said, I have some hacks. He said, like what? And I told him about that. And he says, I think you've just changed my life. I said, seriously, like sometimes, a blog, like it's hard to be consistent with some of those things. But for me, I can go for a walk, and if I'm thinking about a topic, or if I have emails to do or whatever, I just open up a document or even an email, and I just talk into it. And then when I get back home, I paste it. If it's emails, I divide it up. And one day I went and I came back, I had like 3,000 words. I'm like, that's 2 blogs.
That's awesome.
But it's just things like that, and then even a podcast. Dr. Will had me, he's like, yeah, you need to do this. So I just sit down during lunch and just record and go with it. I don't script it, and whatever happens, happens. And the Periscope too, Meredith Johnson with Book Camp PD, she's like, people need to see and connect. And it's not about like just selling my book. It's just things that I think of or things that I'm reading. Like I like to share the work of other people.
Yeah.
I want to highlight what other people are doing. Like if you want to know what I'm doing, ask me, but like, I'd rather talk about like you and what you're doing and the things that are out there, for educators. So, but I do tend to bounce around a lot, and sometimes I will sit, and next thing you know, like 3 hours has gone by, but I've accomplished a lot.
Yeah, I don't think I've ever said this, but I've thought it a lot. So my morning routine, honestly, I take this as a compliment. You're like my morning librarian. When you used to go to the library and you knew you wanted to learn something, so you go to the librarian and say, where can I find some stuff about this? You're like my morning librarian. What I do every morning, God is my witness, I'll go online, whether it's to Twitter or to LinkedIn, and I'll just type in your name, and you take me to something that's cool and amazing that I'm going to learn about, because you are like the archive of what's cool. you go out there and you find all these cool stories and you share them. So thank you for being a librarian. It's pretty amazing. The curator.
Well, thank you. But that's one of my, that is something that I've tried to do every day, like at certain points, to help. And then, when it comes to blogs, like I write my own, but I've written those for, like Getting Smart and some other publications, but I don't know all there is to know about these different trends and things and issues that are in education. And so that's why I've started getting guest blogs for my site, because the different types of stories and different backgrounds and experiences and where all these people come from. Thank you, by the way, for having one of your blogs on my blog site. But it's so nice to get other voices represented, because I don't want to hear from myself all the time. Like I want a lot of different voices, and it helps me to learn too. Like So that's kind of how I go about it in the morning. Like, oh, this is interesting. It's cutting edge, or it's, future of education. What do we need to do for our students? And a lot with, like social, emotional, trauma informed, like those topics that I hear a lot of discussion about in our classrooms, but there's not so much direction, or, people don't really necessarily know exactly where to go. And so I try to pick things that I think will be beneficial to a widespread audience, and hope that, it keeps just like passing the message along. And especially too, if it's somebody that I know who's had an experience, and, they get that firsthand narrative and they're sharing it and they want to really get the word out there. Those are the types of things I really try to be intentional about sharing too.
Do you have any go-to people when you say, I need to just learn about something? Like, are there those people out in the world that have a lot going on that you really gravitate towards?
Yeah, I mean, within certain groups, like I'm in the 4 o'clock faculty PLN, so we have a boxer group, and everybody in there has, there's something that each person is, I don't want to say known for, but kind of like known for, they're the go-to. But it's just such an amazing conversation that happens in there. So there's always something to learn from them. With AR/VR, Jamie Donnelly is just, 100%, like she's beyond amazing. When I want to learn about digital citizenship, for example, like Mary Alice Curran, David Lockett, if you know David Lockett he does everything. He knows AI, he's got the AR/VR, he's got the STEM, but there are some people that I really do tend to check out what they're doing, because I know that they either have they have so much time on their hands, but they are in the type of role or position that they get to work with a lot of different people, or they get to be informed of these cutting edge things. And so like all of that. And of course with ISTE, with the AI that you bring up, I only started to learn more about that about 1.5 years ago to write an article for Getting Smart. And I was amazed at just the number of things out there. And so a year ago, GM gave this grant where 500 educators could take that ISTE course as the first cohort. And I did go back and forth. I'm like, I don't know if I have time for this with everything else. But then I thought, how can I pass up this opportunity? And that was just a tremendous way to learn about the AI. And I just did a panel discussion on Sunday with some people about AI in the future in education. It was actually the part 2, because the first one went so long. We're like, we need a part 2. And now the second one, we're like, we need a part 3. But those are the types of places that I tend to, look toward, or in those communities, just anywhere you can post a question quick and you get an answer. I mean, that's what's so great about being in education today, is like years ago, you had to go and sit in that PD session and it was just the one thing. And now you can sit at home and just anytime, like whatever you want to pull up, you want a podcast, blog, webinar, go to a Zoom, hang out with somebody who's like across the country, it's like people are there. So even if I don't know somebody specifically, just searching on, Twitter or some other form of social media, it's just, you can find somebody.
Oh, it's so cool. You got this level of humility that you don't need. I mean, think about your credentials. You're doing it all. You've done it all. You've got the degrees, but yet you're still out there hungry for more. And the humility that you just displayed was basically all you do is you are just going out there and stealing and learning from all these other people. And I think that's such a powerful message for educators and for students, that the world is constantly evolving and we've got to evolve with it. You've got to find people, not just a person, you've got to find people that you can continue to learn from and connect with. I love that you're not part of one PLN or one little group. You understand that each group has its own value, and you are looking for continuing to grow yourself, not just the collective group. So yeah, I tell you what, I'm bowing down. You on right now. You really do.
No. But it's just, like I said, like I wasn't always this way, but once you get on that path where you're just like, you got this routine, or just like, I want to go, like, what's the next thing? I mean, it's hard to back away from that because, you know that you're going to miss something. And I hate that. And, you said about the technology, like I use a lot of technology, but it's funny because this school year, I have been using a lot less technology. We still do some games and stuff review because that's great with learning Spanish. I mean, just that repetitiveness for them, and student engagement. I mean, they're not all fans of playing games, so I mix it up. But the one thing that I've really tried to do is to get back to just like the teaching, like my own skills and my practice. Like, what was I not doing last year? And I'm trying really hard to just focus on like that aspect of it, doing more research. And I learned a lot about learning sciences this past year. Yeah, about this past year. And that's not something that I had like a really deep understanding of. And so just trying to, I mean, obviously make myself better, because one of the students said, well, yeah, I like you, this class, like you do this, this, and this, and you're a good teacher. I go, oh, no. I said, I can tell you I'm better than I was, but I still got a long way to go. And I think that's true. I mean, we always have to be learning as teachers. I mean, we can take a break for a little bit. I mean, those summers off really don't happen, right? I mean, for me, it's summer. I'm like, oh, right, I get to learn. I got conferences. I can read. I miss my students, but I also know I need that time to kind of reflect on the prior year to get ready for the next year. And now that I've gotten out of the habit of like, wow, I just got to pull the folder out and do the same thing I did before, because that was what I did for the first X amount of years, and that was comfortable. So now it's like, just got to keep pushing no matter what.
I love that realness that you acknowledge that's where you were, because there are a lot of us that were, and it's okay to acknowledge that that's where we were. It's okay. It's not okay to acknowledge that's where we are and continue tomorrow.
Right.
I appreciate that you own it and say, yeah, and then I've made the change. I'm continuing to grow. I'm continuing to evolve, and you're spreading your message to other people now. I love that. So your latest book that you just wrote, I've got to ask, did you keyboard that? Did you type that out, or did you just talk into your book?
Well, here's the funny thing. So last fall, I was actually writing 3 books at the same time while doing all the other things. It just, it just happened. Like one was due November 30th, one was December 1st, one was like December 20th. But
you can write 3 books at once. Come on.
I mean, I guess if you're writing them by yourself, but it was more important for me to tell stories of other people, because I like that component. Even presenting now over the past year and a half or 2 years, I mean, I will put a proposal in for a conference, and I either ask somebody, do you want to co-present? Or if, once it's accepted, and I think, the time approaches, I'm like, oh, you know what? I need to add this person, because we have all these different perspectives, and it's not just me. I want like other people involved. But when I was writing these, a lot of it was just me talking and, doing like into the text document and then fitting it in. But I had like, just in my first book, in other words, between people that I had do graphics, the peer focus group, the stories, I think there were somewhere around like 40 people involved. And in some cases it was a short vignette, but I did that with the second book as well. And so I had like all of these posters and things up with quotes and who was going where and what. And I had to put it all together. And one day driving home last November, I'm like, oh, I forgot about that part. Like, I can't just slap them all in. Like, they had to be weaved in through the story. And what I found was, yeah, my story's in there, but it weaves other people's stories in between. And the best part that I love, I mean, the most exciting thing for me is like hearing the responses from other people who are reading it about the stories that were shared, and seeing those quotes coming out and those stories and those lessons. And I actually had to give a keynote back in April. And I was like, and it didn't really have a theme. And I'm like, I don't know what to talk about. And I thought about the first book and the different quotes that came out of these other writers. And I'm like, these are 10 things that I wish I knew when I started teaching, and the first one was like, I should show like my real self. I should be able to connect and be relatable. And that wasn't me. And I'm like, these are things I wish I did way back then. But for me, that's been the best part. I mean, I've enjoyed the writing. I've enjoyed kind of putting the stories out there, because I mean, for me, I didn't think I had anything to share. Even when I started to blog, I didn't even know what blog meant. And when I found out, I'm like, oh, well, that actually makes sense. But it's like, what would anybody want to know? Well, if your story just reaches one person, it might just be that one person that needs it. Because I've had people say, you know what, teaching isn't for me. I'm too different. I'm too weird. I'm like, different is good. Weird is good. Like, I'm weird. That's fine. Like, everybody has something different about them. And I felt bad because they were feeling discouraged about the profession and their ability to be a good teacher, or whatever, the standard that they held for themselves. But reading one story can make all that difference to that one person who might be feeling isolated. And I kept myself isolated for a really long time, and that was my own choice. And knowing now, again, like, I don't want that for other people. I know sometimes it happens because it's a difficult profession sometimes. And so that's kind of your safe space to get the work done, to do whatever you need to do. And sometimes it becomes a matter of survival. But there were days I left school feeling like, oh man, am I going to make it? And had I reached out to somebody, but I didn't feel like I could, because it's like, oh wait, I don't know what I'm doing. People are going to know. That's okay. Because there are points in every day where I feel like I do not know what I'm doing. And you figure it out as you go, right? So yeah, so that's my story.
You're doing some mic dropping here, because you're saying some things right now that I think are so important for a lot of people to hear. And they're things that I wish I could have heard 5, 10, 15 years ago, because teaching can get extremely isolating. And we are, by the nature of the profession, told that we're supposed to be the experts. We've got 30 sets of eyes staring at us all day, expecting us to have all the answers. We close our door and we're in charge. We have these forced protocols upon us at schools where we have PLCs and department meetings and grade level meetings to try to force us to collaborate, because it does not come natural to us. And then we self-isolate ourselves. I did the same thing as a teacher, as an assistant principal, as a principal. I isolated myself. I thought I was supposed to have all the answers, and I never stood up and said, I don't have a clue, because I was afraid that would be seen as a weakness. And what I started to learn, it sounds like what you're starting to learn too, is as soon as you open yourself up and say, I don't know something, it actually frees you to go learn something. When you close off and act like you have all the answers, there's no excuse to go learn anything. But when you can say, I don't know, doors just start opening. And I love how your own personal story, I don't know if this is intentional or not, but your own personal story truly is the story that you're telling with your books and with your presentations. You're telling the story of this teacher that's evolved and now leans on so many others to keep growing. Like even you talk about your book, in other words, that's the story. That's the message I pulled from that. I mean, there's all these little vignettes and all these different lessons that come through it, but that's what I captured. I didn't do this alone. I am who I am, and I am because of all these ideas. And it's so good.
Right.
So good. But now you got how many books in the pipeline right now?
Well, let's see. The 2 are out. The 3rd one is going to launch around December 8th or 9th, somewhere one of those 2 days. That one is unconventional, and that's with EduMatch. And then my ISTE book is going to be probably March of 2020. And then there are 2 others that I'm currently working on that I have people writing for, that should be out probably spring, and then maybe, early summer, I'll say, we'll hope. But those will be kind of inspired, similar style to the other 2 books, where it's other stories. And no spoilers, but it's going to be, I think they're going to be really interesting. I've gotten some of the stories in, and one of them is about like the one kid, like a lesson that you learned from one kid, but there's a different kind of a spin to it. So we'll see how that one goes. I don't know which one will come out first, because they're both in progress at the same time. But I'm excited about it, just because it's more educators and students sharing stories. And actually, even with my ISTE book, some former students shared their stories to put little vignettes in there about like the impact of some of the different strategies, and not even necessarily the technology, but just sharing their voice. And I love that. Just putting that out there. I mean, you can read about me, but in other words, that was the story behind it. Was I thought of it one night, like, I got to write this book. Let me look at my notes. Most of my notes were quotes. And I thought, I wonder if you could do a book like, here's a quote. In other words, like, how do people view that, or how do they apply that to their work? And initially it was going to be quotes that push our thinking in education. But then I thought, as I started to read more and more, I'm like, this can be read by anybody. And I've had a lot of people read it who aren't in education and say, you know what, I really enjoyed reading the stories, and not necessarily mine. I mean, just the different chapters and other stories that people are sharing their own experiences. And it's just really been an awesome experience for me to see the response to those other stories. I mean, I just, put it all together and added some of my own within, but yeah, it's exciting.
Your story is it's such a good one. You went from closed off teacher to lawyer, to teacher that wants to improve, to teacher that's told they're going to teach something different, goes out and learns how to teach hummingbirds, to the person that goes out and travels. And you are making your name by collaborating with people all over the place on how to become effective teachers on the cutting edge of technology. It's crazy. Do you feel that? Do you feel like, wow, how did this happen?
Yes, sometimes I do. And then I stop and think, 5 years ago, I didn't have Twitter. It's like I just got started on it. I didn't want it.
Yeah.
And then I think about how much my life has changed in the past 5 years. And yeah, sometimes I do think like, how did I mean, it's just me. I just like to read. I like to learn, that's me. But it did come with cost, right? Time away from friends, family, lack of sleep and all of that. But the feedback that I get and, the benefits and the connections that I've made with students, with educators, is such a great payoff that it's totally worth it to have done it and to keep going with it.
Right. It's not easy. I think just heard today, again, that reminder that it's hard work. You don't see the hard work that's happening behind the scenes.
Right.
You gifted ones when the world thinks it's easy. And
Mm-hmm.
like I said before, people look at all the stuff you're doing, they're just thinking you're living the dream, but they don't realize, I mean, we're recording this, it's 9:30 at night. You worked all day. You've got stuff happening all over the place. It's hard work.
It
to
is.
keep learning and to keep growing. But like you said, it's worth it. It's so
It
good.
is.
So
Yeah.
let's just wrap this up real quick, because this podcast is blowing up now that people see your name. 7 billion people worldwide. Every single planet is on the edge of their seats right now, waiting for Rachelle to say what's next and what do they need. What advice do you have right now for all of us to keep going and growing?
Oh my goodness, just like one thing.
Give us
No. I mean, just not be afraid to put yourself out there. I mean, that's the one thing. Like if there's something that you're struggling with, or you feel like, like I don't really know how to best teach this, whatever the concept is, or having challenges in my classroom with behavior, or I don't know the answers when my students ask questions. Like those are all normal things. I mean, we've all been there. And just take one, it's like one thing. Like you don't have to do all of the things, right? It's a progression. Like I didn't, and nobody that does all these things, like is on social media or blogs or any of that. Nobody just decide, I hope not, just one day, like, I'm just going to do it all. Like, let me just sit down and crank this out. Like it's +1. And I've had several friends say that at conferences, and it makes sense, just find one thing to do differently. Just take one chance. And beyond that, just in general, one thing that I've been really trying to do with my students this year is I read Ron Clark's The Essential 55 in the summer. And even reading that just myself, I was like, wow, I need to be a nicer person. I mean, not that I'm not a nice person, but it gave me that perspective. Like, I want for our students to do some of these things, but even just me as a person, I need to be more mindful about some of them. So I made a bulletin board like that. And I've really been trying to notice things more, just do things. I mean, just naturally see what happens. But, like a couple of weeks ago, I saw a student, one young 7th grader, come running through, trying to get to class, and they got to carry all the books. The books went flying. And, you've seen it. Like a lot of times people just walk on by, just let it go. And here come this tall junior, and he saw, and he looked, and he didn't say anything. He just bent down, picked up the stuff. But her face was like first panic, and then just like, what am I going to do? He picks them up, he hands them to her, and he said, "Are you okay?" Yeah. And then she like smiled at him, and then she caught my eye and she smiled at me, and she just went walking down the hall smiling. And I'm like, wow. So when I had him in class later that day, I said, I got to talk to you because I'm in trouble. I said, no. What did I do? Did I do something? I said, you did do something. And I told him, and I just said, you didn't even see any of her face, like any of her, the reaction to any of that. I said, it was amazing. And then his mom came to open house. I told his mom, and she was like, I said, it's just those kind of things. And I feel like those are the types of things that I need to be better about doing, like stepping in and helping, being observant of colleagues, of students that, might need somebody to talk to, or might be struggling with something, instead of being like, all right, here we go. Here's like day 45 in my folder. Yeah. What are we doing today? And nothing else. Just doing something different, try it, see if it works. And if it doesn't, that's okay.
So good. So good. You're preaching tonight. So I appreciate you. I appreciate you.
I appreciate you.
Appreciate you taking time out of your sharing all of this. And one of the reasons I love doing this podcast is because selfishly, I grow with every single conversation because I don't have the money to travel across the country and meet up with amazing people like you. And this gives me an excuse. I think I would be
Yeah.
that if I just started calling people and said, "Hey, can we just like do a Zoom conversation? I just want to talk to you at 9:30 at night." That's weird. But if I can frame it in, I'm going to do a podcast and we can just share this conversation with others.
Right.
I get value, and so do they. And I
Mm-hmm.
appreciate it. I appreciate you just being so willing just to have a conversation and just talk and be you
Yeah.
real because you are a pretty amazing person. So thanks for sharing.
Nah. Well, thank you. It was, I do enjoy these conversations because you're right. Like the, the time change or the time change, the difference in time and the geographical locations. I mean, I had a conversation with a woman in New Zealand a couple of weeks ago and it was on a Sunday and I said, "Oh, I hope you have a good rest of your weekend." She's like, "It's Monday morning." I went, "Oh."
Oh yeah, my
I
bad.
go, "Sorry, it's Monday." But yeah, it's just, that's one of the things I love about tech is it makes these things possible, which is just another, reminder, like there's somebody out there, pick up Voxer, go on Twitter, whatever.
Make it happen.
Zoom. Yep. That's right.
So good. Well, thanks
Right.
again. And I just hope that everybody's listening is going to go out and try that one new thing, try something, take a chance, put yourself out there and keep growing. So
Yep. Absolutely. Thank you.